Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I am your host, Chris Ray Poniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And today, our special guest is the lovely, infamous Heather Penny. She just came out with her new book, Gray Space. We will be talking about that later in the episode. But for now, Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's so good to be here.
Yes, and I will say next time we're going to have you up to the show. I know just with our busy schedules, it did not align.
Yes.
That is okay.
I was bummed.
We
had plans, didn't we?
We did, and I will tell you, just between us and everyone listening, the thousands of listeners, there was about 5 minutes of just depressive grief that I went through. And then I got over it. But those 5 minutes were extremely brutal. But enough about me. We're here to talk about you. And, you know, for your leadership coaching and expertise, I want to get into that, but I actually want to take a trip down memory lane and talk about what got you to this position. Because with our show, not only are we talking about personal finances, we're also talking about business and entrepreneurship. And so it all ties in, because you were not an entrepreneur from the get-go. No. And so before we get into your book and your leadership coaching, I want to take I want to go back in time. And, you know, for you, your first couple jobs as an assistant principal and teacher. So you were teaching for about 11 years, according to my research, the first time around. So I'm curious, what made you want to get into academia in the first place?
Well, honestly, I am such a voracious learner, and my curiosity knows no bounds. Things that my kids probably both love and hate about me, because I have 1,000,001 questions. And so my son jokingly will say, "Bob, you got 3." Yes. And on a good day, he's like, "Mom, I'm sitting here and you've got unlimited questions."
Yes.
But I think really this desire to learn. And then, you know, when you're successful at something, you just keep going. For me, I was successful in school, and that's not the case for everybody, and I understand that. But it was like I got the formula from a young age. And so I just kept going, my master's, my doctorate. And then I started realizing I want to be able to give back what I've learned. And more importantly, I think if we're going to be authentic people, we got to live it out in the field. We can't hide an academia bubble.
No.
So I think that's what got me into it. And then even though it's not corporate America, there is definitely rungs you climb in education. And I started out, of course, in elementary and then administration, and then moved into university level as a professor and on up. But I could see where it was going. And this is to answer your question of how did I get here. I think I was about several decades in of education, and I realized I think I'm made for more, but darn it, I don't know what that more is.
Yeah. Well, and we're definitely going to get into that. I did want to ask, because you got me thinking, so were you one of these kids that you were just the gift to the world as far as you didn't have to study, you got a 4.0, or did you have to really work at it when you were in school?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, listeners, because I know there's so many people that struggle, and I was one of those. School came so easily to me, and I was the first one done and all that stuff. So that's where I found my achievement. However, I will say when I became an educator, my heart went out to all the different learning styles we have. Mm-hmm. And the majority of education right now, it just worked for my learning style. But the more I got educated on, boy, I had so much empathy and compassion for how hard school is for people. And I really adapted to a lot of those different learning styles. And I just kept, and to this day, I will work with people and I'll dip back into my education and they're dealing with dyslexia or different other learning styles. And I go, it has nothing to do with your IQ. You know, has nothing to do with your intelligence. And I'll say that loud and clear over and over, because that's really the message they got growing up, that it probably made them feel dumb. And I want every human to feel like they have an intelligence to offer this world. It's just the educational system is kind of geared for certain types of learning styles, and I happen to be in that learning style.
Yeah. So do you ever remind people that, not everyone can be as brilliant as you, or is that much more passive behind the scenes? So
No, I really try and say, I got lucky. I got to be a part of the learning style that our education system is part of. But at the same time, the more I started learning about it, the more I started having students in my classroom, everything from ADHD to just all these different learning styles, I thought our system is definitely broken. It's really catering to one type.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if I had that, because I was not. I mean, I went to a private school, which that academic rigor was definitely more difficult.
Yeah.
But I was, middle of the pack. So if I was in your boat, man, I would be bragging. Like, I would remind people, look, not everyone is going to be as good as me. But, like, someone's got to get second place. Now, I did want to ask you, though, because 11 years is not a short stint, especially the first go-around in academia or any industry. And what's the saying? It takes about, 10,000 hours or 10 years to become a true expert in the field.
Yeah.
So you were on this dream track to the untrained eye in academia from K through 12 through university. What made you transition into that next chapter in your career?
Well, I loved learning, and I loved watching people learn and grow. Yeah. And I loved getting behind that formula. And I truly believe that every person is uniquely made. So as an educator, I give respect to that. There's no one size fits all. And as I began to really watch that, and I learned from my little third graders of my first year all the way up to my adult learners in university level, we're all working so dang hard. And whatever I can do to support that person moving forward in their journey, that's what I want to be about. And that's the energy I want to bring to the relationship in the room, whatever it is that I'm working in, whether it's one-on-one or in the classroom. So I think what I began to realize as I moved to more middle age, and of course I took a couple detours there, had kids, stayed home a little bit here and there, and just enjoyed doing some adjunct work in my university level and coming in and out and doing consulting. But I began to realize I think I'm made for more, and I want to teach on something other than the 3 R's.
Yeah.
What that is, I have no idea yet. Know, so that was like where I was at going, and this is where I meet a lot of people. Yeah. You know what you don't want to do anymore, but you can't define what you do want to do. And, my tagline is clarity, confidence, courage. It takes courage to slow down and say, I've got a really important question, but I have no clue about the answer. Yeah. A lot of us, myself included, spend a lot of energy avoiding those really hard questions until we burn out.
Yeah.
And that's usually where I meet people. It's they're like, I don't even know what I want to do anymore, Heath. I just know what I don't want to do. And I'm like, let's start there. As you get clarity around what you don't want to do, you start pulling out what you do want to do. And so I hired a coach and started working with a coach for almost 2 years. Didn't even know what coaching was. But he started asking the same questions to me. What don't you want to do? And I'm like, my list is long, But what came out of that is just saying, what do you still want to do? I still want to help people learn and grow. I'm tired of working for the state or curriculum that is already assigned to me that I'm supposed to teach and get everybody through.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man, that could be an episode on its own. Well, it's fascinating too. And I'm sure you've seen this. Obviously I've never worked in academia. I'd be fired immediately, but I can tell you with learning styles, at least in the world of investing, not necessarily planning, but investing, some of the most brilliant minds that I've met are on the spectrum, and seeing their minds work, it's different in the best way, because they see things that us, and I'm just going to say it, mere mortals, we're not going to see. And it's been fascinating to listen and watch, and it challenges me to try to keep up with them. Because I'm not, that's debatable, but I'm not there. And it's a huge gift. But like you said, in academia, that's just not going to fly. I did want to ask, after your first stint,
yes,
my research told me that you were consulting for a little bit.
Yeah.
What were some of the best business qualities that you gained from the consulting experience?
I think it started growing my hunger for the entrepreneur lifestyle. I remember I was on full-time faculty at a university, and I could feel I'm just like, meh. I'm not sure I'm really digging this. And I've worked really hard to get here. And I'm a little scared to admit that I'm not digging this, but I'm not sure what to do next. So I was kind of in that state. And this nonprofit reached out to me in Belize. And they said, hey, we're trying to do something here. We're working with the Ministry of Education to try and break the cycle of poverty. Could you come out and just do an assessment for us? As a university professor who works in education and developing educators, can you just come in and help us with that? And I was like, sure. I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I love the fact that someone's asking me and giving me a shot to do this. So I went out there and I just interviewed all the administrators across the country. And then I wrote up my report and I said, here's what I'd recommend. We are over-resourced in our country. Let's bring in teachers to put on a teacher training conference for the summertime when the teachers are off, to empower the Belizean educators to start addressing it. Made the recommendations, flew back, gave him the report, and went back to my faculty position. And he called me about a week later and said, we love it. Will you come do it? So that's when I was like at this incredible crossroads where I feel like I'm being given an opportunity of a lifetime that I will always regret if I don't shut it down. But I'm going to let go of faculty tenure and the possibility of having a lifetime tenure and job, And so I resigned. I just felt like life's too short to live for tenure. That was always my thinking. And I also felt like I don't even know if I fully agree with tenure. You don't need to be tenured if you're a great educator. You don't need that job security. You should be doing your job and people should be loving you and you should be learning and growing with your student population. So I had this, I put my money where my mouth was, so to speak, and resigned from that, flew off there and then worked there for several years. And that's where consulting I began to realize you can play a little bit more in the consulting field. You can start experimenting with your entrepreneur skills. You can start engaging with completely different populations in the field that are asking important questions like breaking the cycle of poverty.
Right. Well, and what made you get into running Sierra Roasting Company? Because I remember researching that. I'm like, that's a huge pivot. Like teaching, consulting, that.
Oh my goodness. You did do your research on me. Everyone loves that fact of you owned a coffee shop. Okay, so that was us, my husband and I. We had both finished. We were in kind of our career sweet spot, had our master's, our graduate work. He's MBA. Mine was a master's in leadership. We had our babies. I'm telling you, babies change your whole paradigm for how you view life. And we were living in LA, and so we just said, we need quality of life. I had been teaching in the LA school district system. I had been teaching in the low socioeconomic area. I was seeing the issues happening. And I loved being a part of that. And I jokingly call myself quite the hypocrite because I was like, I will raise my kids in this. I'm like, no. As soon as I had my kids, I wanted to go to the safest place on earth. Yep. And that's what I did. I found this beautiful little pocket up here in Northern Cal. And my husband and I just said, these two kids are our projects now for the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. This is what we're called to. And so we started putting all our other passion projects and everything else we were living for and that we had lived for before kids into these kids. This is our legacy. This is the best we can actually offer this world. And so that became a part of a quality of life move. We started looking at shifting our work and what we did. And we're like, let's buy a coffee shop. Let's just do that and bring the kids into that and let's be a part of the community. Well, then the recession hit.
Yes.
We flipped that business within 2 years. And I remember the pivotal point, we were lying in bed and we had just been exhausted from just being coffee shop owners and the small profit margin on coffee. I mean, stuff we just didn't know we jumped into.
Yeah.
And we laughed and my husband was lying there. He goes, I did not go to school to be grinding out coffee and pastries all day long. So we jokingly said, you're right. So we flipped the business, sold that, and then got back into how do we move into more of human services to supporting our people. And honestly, a practical business lesson we learned, we don't ever want to do food again. And I'm not saying food isn't for people, but it's not for us. We don't like the constant management of food and a physical environment. And so there's a couple things that we learned from that. We don't regret it all. Yeah. But it's kind of, we call it the coffee shop lessons of like, we don't want to manage a team. We don't want to manage a site or venue. We don't want to manage food. Super simple concepts, but it was really our first foray into entrepreneurship that moved us both. We're both now full-time independent consultants.
Well, and you know what's shocking? I don't know if you know this, but coffee's the highest margin out of all the food. So it doesn't get any easier. Like God help you if you got into baking or, barbecue or whatever that case may be. So, I mean, you picked the best route, and it's still really tough. You mentioned your kids, and that's your project. So I'm a little behind you in that regard. We have a 1-year-old.
Yes.
And I can tell you the first quick little detour of a story. A couple nights ago, I got a referral, took the call. It was only 15 minutes. And as you know, if you don't do it, no one's going to. Well, I come out of my home office, and Steph had put her down for bed. And normally, up until having a child, my first thought was, okay, right, how am I going to help this person? My mind is spinning and all that fun stuff. Mm-hmm. The first thought I had was, that's one less night I can put Abby to sleep. And that paradigm shift, it's huge. I will say it's funny talking to people that don't have kids about it, because it's just like a different world. Also, it's funny talking to people without kids about kids, because it's just like, well, what do you mean you're not sleeping? What do you mean, like, are you guys okay? I'm like, that's just part of what happens. But the benefits outweigh any cons that anyone could imagine.
Sure.
But I that was a quick little tangent. So what were some of the most valuable skills that you and your husband learned from that experience in running the coffee shop?
Well, I think one of the myths are you only learn things from all the good lessons, and that's where people hold the value, and then they hold regret on the failures. I think the main thing that I want to say really clearly out loud, you can't get to that next level if you don't have the fails and just glean from them. So you have to equally enjoy both. And we lost a lot of money in that venture because we bought it right in the recession. We didn't know the recession was coming up here. We didn't know that Starbucks was going to make a building right next to us. We didn't know a lot of these things. We didn't know that our landlord was going to shift things that really showed small business owners that the limited power we have in California. These were all things we're like, oh.
Yeah.
We do not want to be at the mercy of a landlord again. We do not want to try and deal with a staff of 16. We don't want to have to manage a chef. We don't want to have to. I'm telling you, the list was long of what we learned from that. And we were so grateful for that, because it refined our next business venture. And it was during that time, too, that I moved back into the university level, and he was trying to flip the business and sell it. I was trying to support more of the family, and I took a faculty position, and we had 2 young kids. And I remember sitting in that faculty meeting one time going, this is not the path I want to be on.
No.
And right on the heels of that is, and I get to do something about it. I don't know what yet, but I'm taking full responsibility of, this is not the life I signed up for, but I get to go find the life I want unapologetically. This is the intermediate thing to take care of us and what we need right now, but this is not where I'm going to stay. Yeah. And it was shortly thereafter that I got that opportunity, and then I ended up working with that nonprofit with police. And my criteria, yes, I'll take this position, but I need to work stateside, because I got 2 young kids. I'm only going to go to Belize twice a year. I'm going to manage and mentor the people and the volunteers stateside. And it was a very successful partnership with this nonprofit. And I learned a ton there. So I think everything that you engage in, and I think it feels like everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Even like when I was coffee shop, my husband and I would joke, everybody wants to be a coffee shop owner. What I think we shy away from is the powerful lessons of fails that come along with this that will make you better and really refine the vision you have for your life and give you the lessons you need to create a higher level of living that fits you better.
Yeah. Well, and it's also fascinating. I mean, look, I would be a hypocrite if I said, don't try entrepreneurship, because what the heck have I done? What have you done? I will say, and this is just putting my finance hat on, it's interesting to me how there are people out there that are entrepreneurs, but there does come a point where, other than buying your time, it would actually make more sense for you to go work somewhere else. Like let's say you're making, and I'm making this up, right? $100,000. Not saying that's a bad living. But if someone offered you a job for 250, why wouldn't you? Like it's an interesting paradigm that I don't think people really think of. People are so obsessed with being entrepreneurs today, but that isn't always the best route. Some people are very happy being employees, being intrapreneurs, being executives where you don't own it, but you're getting paid pretty doggone well with perks and bennies and all of that. So just as a side note for listeners, if you think, oh my gosh, I've got to be just like Heather when I grow up, or just like Chris when I grow up, which is not what you want. Think twice about it because it may not be right. I was curious. Do you think the coffee shop, and then I promise we'll move on from it, but do you think that you gained skills that made you a better academic professional?
Oh, yes. Better academic, better coach, better parent, better employer. I employ people now on my team for my own company now. Yeah, I learned a ton. Yeah. And I learned a ton, and I think this is the thing, giving myself the permission to just be honest of this is what I don't like. I know I'm supposed to like this because this is what good leaders do. And I'm like, I don't like sitting down with a bunch of employees and managing them. I want more self-starters and initiative. I will have a limited small team, and I like to stay agile that way. I had a team at the coffee shop of 16, and we were really focused on the venue and selling, and oh my gosh, I didn't like that. Do I like getting results and achieving? Definitely.
Right.
But I learned even what I liked about my leadership. Yeah. And I like a different style of leadership. I like it small. I like it contained. I like a COO who's running things behind the scenes so I can stay in the visionary. I learned a ton about me and that was just one of the experiences in my life. And to go back to your point about entrepreneurship, my path was not super clear of yesterday I was working full-time employed status. And the next day, I was an entrepreneur. It was a gradual hybrid of trying it on. And so when I coach people, I'll say, well, what's your next best option in front of you today?
Right.
Not 10 years from now, because that will be a stepping stone. And you can't define sometimes what you want 10 years ago because you haven't grown into it yet. No. But that next stepping stone will give you the clarity and the confidence you need to courageously eventually take the leap of faith that you will eventually need to do as entrepreneurship. I think what we're doing prematurely, and this is, of course, hindsight looking back, I'm 53, and I go, I think we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to take that big leap of faith. And I want to say, you know what? When I moved into my consulting company and started really creating all my coaching focus, I had 3 different businesses I was trying on. Yeah. And I waited to see which one would grow. I was teaching piano. I mean, it was like, the kids all want piano lessons in my neighborhood. I'm going to teach piano. That grew. I was coaching a retreat service, and I had 2 other partners with me. And then I had my own individual. They all started getting successful, but I was watching to see which was the most successful. Which one can eventually bring in the revenue stream that I want to be earning and that I want to own. And it ended up being my coaching company. So then I shut the other 2 companies down. So I think even in entrepreneurship, you can try on a couple hats, so to speak, and see what fits you best and which one gives you the most joy. The other thing I learned is I don't really want business partners again. Nothing against my business partners. They were wonderful. I loved them. But I shut that LLC down and said, no, I think I'm better as an independent. I liked it until I didn't like it, if that makes sense.
It does. Would you work with your husband again?
No, we're really careful about our boundaries there. And that was probably another lesson we learned. We looked at each other, we're like, I love you, babe, but we're both really independent, strong leaders. Yeah. And we got to let each other fly. And so what we ended up then doing, yes, we kind of like the idea of working together, but more parallel instead of enmeshed is probably how we work. And some husband and wife teams are really good with that, integrated partnership. We work better, more parallel. So we open an S Corp, and then we each run our own consulting firms under the S Corp. And that works really well for us. We each have our own assistants. We have our own teams. I have a DBA for how I run my company. He has his for his company, but we run everything under. So technically, yes, we're business partners, but not really. We each run our own consulting firms under our own S Corp.
So you've kind of structured it like a holding company. where you've got like the mothership and then you've got your own entities, so to speak. That's fascinating. I never thought of that. Well, and it's interesting because we have clients. I can think of one, a children dentist's office down the road, two of our favorite clients. And the husband is the dentist and the wife is the manager of the office, and she runs it beautifully. And it just, you can tell it just works extremely well. And they balance that. And that's something that even my wife and I have even thought about, like, man, like if we could get that would be pretty freaking cool. But on the flip side, I've seen people, and I'm sure you've witnessed it, where obviously this doesn't happen with you and your husband, but people just, I mean, it can end you. Like that's not good. Well, I'm curious. So obviously you went that leadership route. Do you wish, looking back, that you didn't diversify into, like piano lessons and whatnot and just focused on that earlier? Or do you think you wouldn't have known leadership was your calling had you not done that? I'll pick 3 and whichever one sticks.
I think I always knew from a young age my leadership was my calling. That was part of the home I grew up in. That was just how I felt like I was born into. Like, we were all leaders in my family. We were kind of positioned to take responsibility for what leadership meant in this world. And the way I was trained more of leadership is about serving humanity. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room or being the strongest voice in the room. It's about serving humanity and coming alongside them. So, my father was a pastor, my mother was a therapist. So their leadership to me was really modeled on a servant leadership style. That's what I've carried over into my coaching as I work with individuals and C-suite teams and organizations. And that's the ones I'm really a strong fit for. Yeah. The ones that are open to this idea that, we are about serving our people. And those are the ones I have longevity with. But go ahead.
Go for it. Oh. No, I'm not interrupting. I'm a gentleman, Heather. I don't interrupt.
Well, Chris, I'm so sorry, but I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
That's okay. I do have that effect on people as well. No, mine was, for the leadership coaching, because, you mentioned the whole idea of like diversifying 3 separate businesses, all that good stuff. But more often than not, I've seen a conflicted idea in people's minds going, man, I really should have just stuck to my guns with, in your case, it was leadership, but in other cases, whatever was bringing in the bacon earlier. Like, do you think that, let me ask you kind of a second question on top of that. Had you started focusing on leadership sooner, because I'm sure you have plans, right, for the next 1, 3, 5 years and all that, you would have compounded where you'd maybe be like 3 years down the road farther or 5 years down the road? Or is that just too difficult for you to think about too?
Well, I guess I go from a different angle. I truly believe that leadership starts from within. And I had to figure out myself first. And I was going through an identity shift in my life. So part of me trying on these other different businesses was me dipping my toe into entrepreneurship. And honestly, I'm a very cautious person as well. So I'm not one of those huge risk takers, and probably because it's my fear of failure. So I had to just kind of try it on a little bit for size and learn who I am as a leader and what I liked and didn't like. I didn't have a lot of that opportunity, and this is going back to my academia. And I would say people in the military probably relate to this as well. If you're really committed to the military or academia, it's very scripted for you. You know exactly what you need to do in order to be a credentialed teacher, in order to pass this grade, in order to move into university level, you know all these things. In order to publish your research, it's a very scripted world. So is military. And there's probably other scripted worlds out there for you. I think what I was trying to do was step outside the script. And when I went back to get my PhD, I chose human services. But I'm telling you, it was this massive, courageous thing for me because, and this just shows you the kind of the sheltered world I grew up in, but it was like, what? I'm not going to get a doctorate in education? I still remember when I showed up at the university and everybody moved over into the doctorate of education room and they said, okay, all the PhD and human services go over here. The vulnerability I felt in that, because I was leaving my field that I had been successful in and that I knew the pedagogy, I knew all the language, I knew how to speak it, right? And be successful in it. And I was saying, I'm going to veer off that path. And basically, for the first time in my life, I'm going to go back to school and learn what I want to learn and own what I want to own and research what I want to research and dare to believe that I have what it takes to show up in this world. Granted, I didn't do that till I was in my 40s. Yeah. So it took me that lifestyle where I did follow all the rules. You know, I call it the good girl complex. I did everything right, followed the scripts, and then realized, can I write my own script? I think I can.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a little bit more for women, because I do work with that with women, but I have a tremendous amount of empathy now for people daring to believe they can write their own script and being able to step outside what our world is telling you have to follow. And that's part of what Entrepreneur taught me. So as I started trying to write my own script and doing all my different businesses and saying, maybe I can be successful and not only make money with what I love doing, but actually enjoy it more, but still use everything I love about education and transfer it over. Maybe I can. That, for me, was my leap of faith.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Interesting. Well, one thing you did mention, which this may come as a shock to you, out of all the entrepreneurial minds that I've interviewed, the one common trait that I'd say 99% of them have is they're actually what you would say is risk adverse. I would actually disagree. I would say they're very risk calculated. And so for you, the reason why you did that is, and I'm pulling this out of a hat here, by the time you got to 40, you've compounded all of that success to the point where are you really taking any risk by venturing off into the other world? Maybe not, because you've got a great brand. People love and care for you and in your passions. And so at that point, one of my favorite investors, Monish Pabrai, he always says, I take no risk so I can take all of the risk. Now, he's talking about investing and, God forbid he said that on the show, that the SEC would be all over me. So he wouldn't say this on this show. But I can tell you, taking that mentality and applying it to career, so for you and your leadership clients, I think you would be stunned at how calculated they all are. I mean, every once in a while you've got people that are just like, like an Elon Musk who just is obsessed with risk. Like he wants that edge. But most people are not him for a number of reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
And we're all pushing through barriers, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, and I wanted to talk about some of your clients, not obviously like, what's their tax ID number and how many clients do you have, but from a leadership perspective and just like quality organizations, what are some of the most valuable traits you've seen organizations possess?
I would say the commitment to the long game is probably the easiest way to say it. Okay. And when I started realizing what was not working in consulting, I created my own niche. And the easiest way to say that was very popular in my field as a consultant and a coach. And I use both those terms interchangeably because, I'm independently supporting and advising different organizations and C-suite teams. But it was a lot of we're going to come in and do this amazing, week intensive or these awesome assessments we're going to bring into the organization and everyone's going to get on board with it. And it's going to be an awesome experience and mountaintop high. And it is. It's super cool until it fizzles. So typically I'm going into organizations and I like doing that follow-up for the long game. So this one that I'm working with, and I'm going on 8 years now working with this organization, they brought me in because they had these amazing consultants that came in and did these great assessments, like strengths assessments. These are great assessments, 360. These are things I love and I really agree with. And I said, well, why are you bringing me in? These guys are great. And they're like, well, it only lasted for like 2 weeks or 2 months. So I was listening to it and I said, yeah, my specialty is the long game. Give me one of your top leaders. Give me 9 months. Let me meet with him or her for over, once a week or twice a month. And I'm telling you, they will influence the culture for their whole department. So I remember at the time, they gave me one of their top directors, and he had 40 in his department. And I think I'd gone, and I'd said all this, put the contract to this, right? Within the second session, the CEO and the COO had both called me and were on the phone with me, talk about pressure, and said, should we keep him? Should we fire him? Is this someone that we need to invest in? And I go, whoa. There's no way I can, first of all, tell you that. I will never tell you who you need to fire or not. That's not my role to play. But I will stick up for humanity needs time to learn and grow. And I need time to influence that. And I'm telling you, if you give me the time and you give this leader the time, it will influence the whole culture of the organization. So the pressure was on, and so they're like, okay, great, Heather, we're going to trust you. And basically it was more of like, you were our best option, because these other guys that came in, it was fun until they didn't have any longevity or there was no application across the company. My background as an educator knew you need 9 months to help a third grader get ready for fourth grade. That was my basic paradigm in human growth and development. You need time to spend time with these students in order to get them for the next level. So I created my whole company really off of that. I'm someone you hire for the long game. Yeah. If you've had some amazing people come in and do assessments, I will actually use those assessments. I'm trained in all of them, or most of them. I will use them, but I will help make application for them. And I will help your people know how to use it for the long game. So here I am 8 years later. Fortunately, it was such a success. And there was a bit of a gamble. You talk about a risk, but I'm banking on what I've learned about basic human principles, give people the chance to learn and grow, spend time with them, mentor them, model for them, help them measure milestones. And I'm telling you, we're going to see success. And you just give me that top person, and I think the other myth is, well, let me work with all 40 people. I don't really believe in that, because then they're becoming dependent on me as the consultant versus the leader being trained and empowered and to be able to believe in their own clarity and their own confidence and their own courage to lead the culture that they need to develop for their own team.
Yeah. And also it goes back to not everyone was as academically brilliant as you. And so everyone below that, right? Just taking it full circle, right? Like, we're not dealing with the peasantry here. No, on a serious note, I totally get it. And I'm sure I can only imagine these calls that you've had. I mean, have you ever had, it's not this extreme, but have you ever had a call with like the executives and they're like, hey, Heather, we took your advice. We fired everyone. Like, now it's down to the studs. Like, on a serious note, have you ever had those calls where you've gone through things and like the team just misses the boat? Like, how do you reverse that?
Well, and that's part of why I started calling myself leadership coach and trusted advisor. The trusted advisor piece is usually for that C-suite team, that executive level, where they will come in. This has just happened recently. We're bringing in a new assessment for the company, and I love this assessment. It's wonderful. But they were wanting to empower their people too prematurely. Their people weren't ready for it. And I could see that it would totally backfire. And sometimes we can weaponize assessments, like the 360s could be used as a really bad evaluative tool where people are just pointing fingers and blaming. And I've seen that happen. I've had to help cultures recover from some of these feedback tools because the people weren't trained on how to really give productive and constructive feedback. So that's the piece at the advisement level that I'm always like helping them keep a pulse on the timing and being able to get out ahead of things so that it doesn't backfire. With this company I'm working with now, we're implementing basically focus groups to give clear feedback. And it's about a company about 300 employees. And so we have taken some of the high leaders there, and there's about 50 of them, and we've put them into small groups across the departments to really go after how we're going to achieve the competition that's coming at us and maintain that competitive edge. And I said, well, your people know. We got to give them time and space to do it. So this then is the next levels. As I was working and coaching these individuals, I said, now I've worked with them. Let's empower your people to start doing more of this coach approach to leadership. So you can see when I have more of the long-term relationship, and that's what I do with my work, is I like the clients that I have the long-term relationships with to help their people evolve and help their culture evolve. And it's always about making sure that we're empowering the people and they're not becoming codependent on me as the coach and consultant. But it's also holding that tension of, wait a minute, you can't cut them loose too quickly because it will backfire on you. And culture change, as we all know, we have to stay really sensitive to the pace of how culture changes. And you're not always going to get it right. So it's also part of like, how do we course correct? How do we just own it and say, oops, sorry, guys, let's backtrack a minute and we're going to have a group meeting on this. We probably implemented this change too prematurely, or we didn't update you on it, or we forgot to tell you the results of it. It's that, and this goes into my new book, with creating a grace culture that allows people to stay creative, curious, and productive in your environment, so that the culture now begins to be this really not just safe place, but a really powerful place that people are able to be innovative with you.
Yeah. Well, and there's a ton to unpack, and we might have to have you back on for round two. One of the things that I actually wanted to ask you, because when we first got together and met, it was an award-winning chat, and you were talking about how you and your husband started actually turning the corner financially a couple years after you bit the bullet on the entrepreneurship side of things. And, there's a concept, and I don't know if you share this with your clients a lot, but we talk about this a lot on the show. It's the concept of goodwill. And, goodwill is a really weird value on a company balance sheet. But in life, I firmly believe as you compound your goodwill, which is basically the character of who you are, the money is going to follow. Okay? Yeah. So for you and your husband, what were some of the best financial moves? This is more of a personal finance question that you made and your husband made. And then what was the one financial move that you wish you could have back?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with the one that you have back, because then we can end on a positive note about the
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off with the bad one.
Rip the Band-Aid off, yeah. Okay, so one of the financial moves I wish we could get back is, of course, we had a great friend, and it was in the tech world, and he's like, this new thing is coming out. It's going to really support, you see where I'm going with this.
Oh, yeah.
And we need investors, but we got to move quick, and here's the return you're going to get. We're super conservative financially, but we love this friend, we trust this friend, and we invested. And the guy ended up being a con artist. And boy, he was one of those really like Leonardo DiCaprio's Catch Me If You Can, super smart con artists. So I'm like, first of all, we had to go through the whole thing of we feel so stupid and the shame spiral that's hitting us. Then we had to like deal with our friend feeling really bad and making sure that we took care of that friendship, but also like lesson learned, we do not want to do this again. And also realizing this is part of the cost sometimes of taking a financial risk.
Yes.
And I think you get to learn when you have the losses. But honestly, I'm thinking of that chunk of change. I'm like, ooh, I'd love that chunk of change back.
Yeah.
But we have a rule in our marriage where I'm like, and I brought it up the other day. I'm like, oh, if we'd taken this chunk of change and put it into here. And he's like, Heath, you're not allowed to go there. And I go, you're right. Because that's living with that regret and guilt of like, of course we would all, if we all lived with hindsight, we'd all have that 20/20 clarity. But we don't, and we took a financial risk, and it backfired on us badly. So that's something I would love to have back, is really that money.
Yeah. Well, and wait a second. So hold on. And I'm not trying to rub salt on the wound, but I'm just intrigued. So this was it the friend that recommended that you do this, or was your friend the con artist?
No, it was our friend, and he also got taken as well.
Okay, got it. Because if your friend was the con artist, I'm like, that's not a friend.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. No, good, and still lifelong friend, and still someone we would totally trust. And so we felt so bad for him because he actually had sweat equity. So he had spent, a couple of years giving into this and realized, honestly, all we lost was money. We didn't lose time. And honestly, I know this is a money show, but there's that piece where you kind of have to hold money loosely at times.
Yes.
And the way I hold it loosely is sometimes I go, it's monopoly money, move on. I cannot sit there and keep obsessing of what that did to our bank account. We had plenty coming in to replace it. Honestly, in the big scheme of things, it's gone unnoticed.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to sit there and keep focusing on that number, even though it's a big number. I want to focus on the fact, the lessons we learned with it, and also it reprioritizes that money is not our God. Money is something to be used, and at times is going to backfire on us, but that's not what we serve in this world. And we get to trust that the lesson was learned, that we needed to learn from it, and we get to move on, and we get to also forgive ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I always tell people in investing, you don't, I'm not saying you don't learn from the wins, but let's just be really honest.
Yeah.
If you buy, and I'm making this up, if you buy a stock for $100 and it goes up to $250, all you really learned was you were probably more right than you thought.
Yeah.
But if you have a company that you buy and then it decreases, and then you've got clients going, why are you holding this? You moron, you idiots, you whatever. And you're like in the movie 300, right? Just the 300 Spartans just standing their ground, knowing that we are gonna die at the stake by holding our conviction. That's when you really learn about your losses. And frankly, one thing I will say is I agree with your husband saying you can't go back, there's no take backsies. I would disagree in the fact that you can take that experience and go, okay, like you said, what do we not do in the next investment? Or better yet, what were some of the pitfalls from that investment? So for future investments, when you're looking at them, you can go, oh, this smells exactly like bad tech guy, hard pass.
Yep.
Now, what were some of the best strategies and best financial moves that you and your husband made once you started turning that corner? Because I wanted to end that on a positive note.
Yes, thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
because this is really what has driven our marriage and really our financial success, and it's values driven. My husband, his work is a estate planner.
Yes.
And what he does is he comes alongside people and he focuses on the values that they hold so that they can leave the money where they want to leave it. And I love, that would really sum up of how we look at finances. Money comes and goes. It's not something to be irresponsible with, but it's not something to obsess about. So you're always holding that tension. I would say we were really, we were young when we got married. We were 23. So we were like kids growing up together. And we met when we were 18. So he's my best friend, the love of my life. But I'm telling you, we got married where we both grew up putting ourselves through college. We got married with loans, and we were like, clearly we need some financial structure for the long game here. And I remember this really wise sage coming alongside us, and I think we'd only been married a year, and he said something that has driven us our whole marriage. And he said, drive your stake. Heather and Darren, drive your stake. And that was so important for us because Darren and I are both very high achievers, and we love working. Honestly, we love making money. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm like, if it's a high that you can kind of get, right? You don't know. We're not the type that's like, oh, we're okay being poor. We're not really that type. So I think as I listened to him, I was like, oh, greed could really take over, couldn't it? And he said, understand how much you want to make and drive your stake there. That has so driven us. So now when we go above that stake and we get more money than we need, we talk about where we're going to give it away. We talk about maybe we can pull back. Maybe we don't need to say yes to these clients. For instance, my son is studying abroad in Switzerland through Pepperdine. We cleared our schedule for March, and we took off to go visit over there and spend the month of March over there with our son in Europe. And things like that I think because we committed to driving our stake, we didn't get into that financial rat race of, well, more money, bigger house, more cars, more things. We just drove our stake and said, this is really all we need. Yeah. This is all we need. And we ran that and we've been married 30 years now. We've run our life that way the whole time. The second thing I would say, and I say this to every entrepreneur, and I said this to a young couple who really wanted to model their life kind of after our entrepreneur thinking. And I said, always live on one salary, always. Because if one of you either gets sick or if one of you has the option to want to stay home with the kids, this is what shocked me. I've always loved working. I remember I was sitting in a faculty meeting at the university, and I came home to my husband. I said, I'm tapping out. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at home, and you guys are having way too much fun. I want to be home with these kids.
Yeah.
And this is passing me up. And if I don't get to do this with them, I will regret my life. I knew that. Like, you want to picture your life on your deathbed scene, and nobody's sitting there going, I wish I would have made another $1 million. I wish I would have padded my resume a little more. I mean, what are we all saying? We're all saying, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. I hope my loved ones knew that I loved them. I hope we nurtured and cultivated love. These were all things as an achiever I had to really stay focused on. And so we were able to do that.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, perfect. He goes, and at the time he was staying home and I was working and supporting. He goes, I'll go get a job and you can come home with the kids. So he then went out and got a job, and I think it was like 6 or 7 years. And that's part of where I started bringing the piano lessons, because I was like, I got too much entrepreneur in me. So
yeah.
Ended up starting out with 2 kids and ended up, I think, with 30. It was around the neighborhood. I was doing all these recitals. I have a blast. I love growing things. But that fit, my entrepreneur fit the stage of life I was in and with my kids. And yeah, I had a master's in leadership. I was getting my doctorate at the time. My goal was that my kids would never know I was getting my doctorate. And I remember when I graduated, they turned to me, they're like, what? You're graduated with what, Mom? And they were probably like 5th grade and 7th grade. And I was like, perfect. Yeah. They never felt the stress of me going back to school. And I chose a school that helped me accommodate my personal lifestyle. So I think those would be the 2 things that has really driven my life. And I'm telling you, to your point earlier, the money always follows. You live by your values, the money will always follow. And one of my biggest leaps of faith was saying, I need to go back and get my doctorate, but I have no idea where to get the money. What was so powerful when I took out the loans, which is like an expensive car.
Yes.
And I realized, I don't know how I'm going to pay this back. And my worst fear was that I was going to be a barista trying to figure out how to, pay it back. And I thought, no, I get to believe in me and I get to trust in me. I got secured that corporate client, and within 1 year I paid back my whole doctorate. And that taught me, you invest in the right places when you're ready to invest and take that leap of faith, the money will return back to you because you're doing it from a place of value that says, this is what I believe is going to be the best investment in me and how I can best serve the world. And you have to have that. And it goes back to that clarity, confidence, courage, those perfect trifecta of that's what I had to work through to say, this is a little scary to gamble on me, but it's time. I've grown and built a lot of other organizations and visions and missions that people had. I think I'm getting called into something unique, and it's time for me to gamble on me.
Well, there were a couple things that you brought up. One, I think it would pay dividends for you. So one of the episodes, I had Guy Spear on from Switzerland. He's a hedge fund manager on the Mount Rushmore of investing, and I've been a fan of his for years now. He's a friend. And one of the things that he wrote in his book, which I've read multiple times, is the concept of greed being good if it is used for good. And it's a really interesting concept because that second part of it, when you mentioned hey, I don't want this to sound bad, but I like making money. I don't know what got into everyone these days where people talk about, oh my gosh, you're making a lot of money and you pay a lot of taxes, first world problems. It's dude, do I work to make sure that my taxes go to God knows where? No. I work to make sure that my baby girl, my wife are taken care of. My amazing teammate, I can compensate her accordingly. We can reinvest into the business. I don't work for that. And so I think for you and I know you get this, but for listeners out there that feel bad about making a lot of money, no, absolutely, hard pass. If anything, if you're making diddly poo, why don't you get inspired and do something else, right? Yeah. Because for the first couple years in entrepreneurship, you don't make squat. In fact, you probably lose money. That's how it is. So I just had to get that out there because I hate, when people are like, oh my, we have people sometimes come in, they're like, okay, so how much you make? Because I need to
Yeah.
know this. And they're like, well, I did really well last year. I'm like, dude, own it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freaking own it. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, you don't need to be a douchebag about it, but like,
Yeah.
just state it. Like, hey, we've worked
Yeah.
really hard for X, Y, and Z, and don't ever feel
Yeah.
guilty about it.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm curious for you, because I want to be obviously respectful of your time, and I also want to say I'm excited to hop on your show.
Thank you.
Very, very soon. What advice would you give to those that are looking to get into the world of leadership coaching?
Well, I think it goes back to my personal value. Leadership starts from within. And I think people can sniff out inauthenticity. And I want to say, do your work. Everybody slow down, do your work, get your own clarity, your own confidence, and your own courage. And then give everyone else the respect that they have their own inside them. Your job is not to tell them what their clarity, confidence, and courage is. Your job is to be a sounding board so they can find it. And it's learning how to get our own ego, all my fingers pointing back, getting my own ego out of the way, where I feel like I want to go, oh, I know the answer. Let me tell you what you should be doing with your life. I find myself going, nope, this is not your clarity, Heather. This is staying in this. If I were in a conversation with you one-on-one, I'd be like, Chris, you've got the clarity within you. How do I help you find that and empower you to find that? And then you now have a system for how you go find your clarity, how you go find your confidence, and how you go engage your courage. So that eventually, and this is like parenting and teaching, right? We should be working ourselves out of a job. You have to live with that humility, I guess is what I want to say.
Yeah. You
got to live with that humility that one day your clients will not need you, maybe in what you're offering. Want to be able to evolve. And the only way they can evolve and grow is if you keep empowering them that they have it within you. And sometimes they will pass you up, and you got to be okay with that. And sometimes they're going to just shoot for the moon, and you got to be there cheering them on, shooting for the moon.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see coaches and consultants, their ego is too at play. They want to be seen as the expert. They want to be affirmed as the expert. They want to feel good about the contributions they're making. To me, that is like a thinking of scarcity. There's not enough success to go around. And I want to go, there's so much abundance of success out there that someone else's success never has to threaten yours. And you don't have to ride someone else's coattails to get your own feelings of success. Yeah. And one of the best things to be able to do is to stay in that space with people and watch them fly. And then also let them continue to evolve and tell you how they need to grow. We got to stay sensitive to that. And I think a lot of coaches and consultants, the great ones, I think do this really well.
That is awesome. Well, before we let you go, because I could talk your ear off all day, I have to let you plug your book, okay? Uh-huh. So I first want you to plug your book, and then after you're done plugging your book, tell our capitalizers where we can go, buy the book, and best support and follow you.
Yeah, first off, I want to say, Chris, thanks so much for endorsing it. When we first got connected with Book Thinkers, and we both loved Nick and Luke and Chandler and all those guys, I was like, why does he want to interview me? I am not a finance expert, but we knew the values underneath the work that we're doing, and we immediately connected and synced up there. And that was the language I think we both spoke, and I really appreciate your endorsement on this book because it has nothing to do with finance and everything to do with finance.
Yes.
It's seven practices of what we call gray space. And just to give you an example, the first two, it's you can choose to respond or react. You can choose to question or you can choose to accuse. And in the work that I'm doing, I realize that we're living in such an increasing volatile world that is creating more and more chasms between us. I want it to be a bridge that says, you know what, we're more alike than we realize, whether it's in politics or anything that we are a part of. We are more alike than we realize. We all want to be in places where we are heard, valued, and cherished. We all want good things for our kids. We want this next generation to have a better world than we're living in. We all want better things, and we are much more aligned than we realize. But we get too distracted on any kind of minutia difference, and worse, we treat that as a personal offense to ourselves. I'm challenging I'm asking anybody to join me with this, and so many great organizations and individual leaders are joining me in this space of saying, I want to be part of Grace Space. I want to learn how to, in that nanosecond, to respond to someone instead of reacting. I want to learn how to question versus accuse. And the reason I say that is because we have a nanosecond sometimes and I work in intense worlds all the time. These are 7 practices I had to really work on to make sure that I was being my best self in these high-pressure environments. I could feel the pull of, like, he's accusing me, I'm going to accuse back. I could feel the pull of, they're putting the stress on me, I want to react and snap back at them. I can feel it in my personal life. And I sat down at my desk one day and I thought, these are 7 practices. And, of course, there's a myriad of millions we could come up with because grace is such a big word. Mm-hmm. But when we think about this idea of grace, it's to be giving goodwill to one another, to be considerate, to being on the same playing field, not being superior. It's this whole essence of how we want to offer grace. And for me, I feel like we can do better than just creating safe spaces. We can evolve into really creating these spaces of grace that says, I'm going to take the responsibility to take the initiative to start practicing these 7 practices. So all the different individuals and groups and organizations I now work with are starting to say, we are a culture of Grace Space. And that makes me super excited because I'm giving them 7 little handles. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect. Perfection is not the goal here. It's being able to have a quick handle to say, oh, Heath, when I was getting so mad, I remembered I got to question versus accuse. I'm like, perfect. That's the win. Not perfection. It's giving you something to like reach for instead of I'm getting flooded with my own emotions of how this guy is really ticking me off. And I want to give him a piece of my mind. And I tell people, I'm like, you have the right to. You know, you have the right to show them how smart you are and how superior you are, and you have the right to be right. But I will tell you that that's not very sustainable, and eventually that will backfire. And honestly, how do you feel when you walk away from that situation? Our society right now doesn't have the language or the tools to know they can reach for something else, and they actually have a choice to do something else.
Yeah. Well, and where can our listeners go to follow you and buy the book?
Yeah, the easiest place is just to check me out on heatherpenny.com. And I'll take you to all the different places, my podcasts and my weekly blogs and my emails, where you can find my books. They're all sold on Amazon and other, I think Barnes & Nobles and other places too.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Heather, thank you so much for tuning in. And to the listeners that are tuning in, thank you as always for listening in to Capitalize Your Finances. Just to conclude what we learned at the very beginning, you will never be as academically brilliant as Heather, but we can fight to get to second place, okay? If you have, on a serious note, any questions about today's episode, if you are trying to dive into the Capitalize world, whether it's the books, the courses, the podcasts, the brand, the new blog, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com. Follow us. Do everything that you want under the sun. If you want to hop on the show, you're like, wow, this is a pretty great show. Maybe I'd want to be interviewed by the Captain Capitalize. Or I have a question about my own personal financial situation that I want answered on the show, or just have it run by me. You have every right to shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com. I look at it daily. However, I am a busy boy, so I do my best to get back to you within 48 hours. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, Certified Financial Planning Professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing. Take care.
You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Heather Penny and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.